attended council hearings in person. You tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now, you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voice person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. I'm your host, Josh Gibson, the council's director of communications. You may also know me as our voice on social media. And we are back. We are blessed to again be with Ward 6 council member Charles Allen, who stood me up for approximately 5 years, but apparently things have been patched up because he's back in like, I think 5 weeks.
There was like a pandemic or something. Nobody was meeting virtually during that time.
Yeah. Yes. But anyway, we're all joking aside, very grateful to be back with Charles Allen to talk about a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts: mobility in the District of Columbia. And the thing I don't think folks realize, like I hate to generalize, I feel like a lot of folks in the outer suburbs, if you have to go to point A to point B, you get in your car and you go. There's no decision making. There's maybe you have 2 cars in the garage and you take the big one or the little one. The complexity of making a how do I get where I'm going decision if you live and work in the city is awesome. It's like the meme of the guy with the thread connecting the different thumbtacks on the wall. It's an elaborate decision. You're talking modes of transportation. You're talking, is it something you own or is it something that you rent? Are you walking? Are you running? Are you biking? Is it capital bike share? Is it a scooter? Is it a moped? Are you carrying a package? Are you going to need to stop on your way? And are you taking the bus? Are you taking the metro? It's infinitely complicated, and every single trip is different. It's like you almost need like a sommelier who's selecting your transportation option. And that's a little bit of what we want to get into today, is sort of the richness of transportation in the city. And I know this is something that you are proud of and a happy participant in.
Yeah, well, now you use the words complicated and elaborate. I would actually argue that what we want is one that has lots of choices, but that those choices are simple to make, that it's not complicated, it's not elaborate, but it is as you pointed out, it's the decision tree you're going through, which mode is going to work best for me or which combination of modes. Last week, I was trying to figure out, based on getting down to the Wilson building for something, I then had a community event I got to go to after that, had something else I got to pick up my kids, and I had to map out, not in a complicated way. I want to think, what was the best choice for me to make? And between my own bike, a bike rental, e-bike, my Metro pass to jump on at Union Station for Metro Rail, Metro Bus, and just walking, it was easy. It was simple. The only complicated part was just kind of figuring out, well, I think I'm going to take this mode here, then I'll switch over to this, I'll switch over to this. And that to me is how transportation mobility works best, is when you have lots of options available at your fingertips to fit what your needs and your modes are for that day. So our goal is certainly not to have it be complicated in a way that's overwhelming, but to make sure that you have a numerous set of choices to make about what's going to work best for you, for your family, for your needs on any given day. Yeah,
absolutely. That was what I intended. It's there's a good fit, and you're what is the best way of doing this? My daughter's in camp and it's across town. There's no good metro or bus option, so we're using a zip car. And I don't normally drive places. And the thing is, I love photography and I love taking tiny detours. And I've always meant to check that thing out. And there was a coffee shop I've been meaning to try, and I had a little time on the way back, so I was going to stop. It's not easy when you're in a car. Mm-hmm. In the city to quickly do a little fun side trip. That's much better if you're walking, but walking takes time.
Well, I will say one of the things that we've increasingly seen grow dramatically is also the options around electric cargo bikes or electric bikes, that even in hot weather, you can move pretty rapidly across the city or on a cargo bike with family or cargo, and you're going to find parking easily. you're going to be able to move fairly quickly. And to your point, I want to be able to have the flexibility to make that quick side trip if I want to, or go check out that coffee shop or that park or whatever you're going to do. And electric bikes, especially electric cargo bikes, are becoming a much more popular option, I think, across the whole city, and opening up, again, people's kind of transportation and mobility choices.
This seems like it should exist. If it doesn't, is there any electric cargo bike sharing app that exists? Because I know there's a ton of electric bikes out there, but I haven't seen the cargo bikes. And that seems like the car sharing companies all have pickup trucks and vans, but I haven't seen the bike companies doing that yet.
Not yet. There's actually one electric cargo bike sharing in Southwest that they're piloting, but it's very, very small. We're talking a couple of bikes. And I think it'd be interesting to see how that works out. And I think that you're going to see that start to kind of grow the same way that when your standard electric bike first got started, a lot of folks kind of gave it a sideways look. I'm not quite sure what that is. How am I going to get around? And very quickly now, the number one complaint I get from bike share riders, there aren't enough e-bikes out there. They love their bike share and they love getting on an electric e-bike with Capital Bike Share, but they want to see more. So very quickly, people are adopting this as a great way to get around safely, get around quickly. And again, you can bike in July and August on an e-bike, and you're not going to break a sweat usually.
It's also interesting that Capital Bike Shares had a number of record days in the past month or two when downtown real estate's struggling, Metro's struggling. It's good to see people voting with their feet and seeing that that's a successful option.
It really is. And, bike share for the city works really well for tourists that are coming in town. We make it very easy and simple for folks to get around when you're visiting our great city, but also for neighbors. Now that you see such an expansion in a network of your stations, when you think about when some of the the bike ride sharing companies first got started, one of the biggest selling points they had was that your cabbie station, is 6-8 blocks away from your destination, and you'd rather be able to pull your bike up, park, lock it up, and you just walk away. And I think Capital Bike Share has created their network in a much stronger way, such that you're going to be within a block or two probably of your destination. And so, yeah, I can park my bike, because bike share is a lot less expensive than your e-bike if you're using Uber or Lyft or examples like that. So, I took an e-bike the other day from my house to the office, and it was 80 cents. That's incredibly cheap and a great way to kind of get through 10-15 minutes door to door. 80 cents. Metro isn't going to beat that in terms of cost and affordability. So I think we're going to see more and more of these options open up people's choices from a financial standpoint, from a location standpoint, and that mobility is a really good thing for DC. And it gets more people out of their cars. So that helps on congestion. So the folks that do need to drive, you can drive, but for the folks that have options, let's get people out of their cars, let's get them on bike, let's get them on foot, let's get them on transit, and everybody wins.
And how is membership and you spoke a bit to this in terms of stations going in the more sort of geographically spread out wards where you're dealing with more distance, like 5, 7, and 8. Is the uptake good as well in those wards?
Based on what I've seen, I think that the growth continues, but it's all about making it accessible, right? You've got to put those Capital Bike Share stations in and put them around. And so there's been a real push and prioritization to identify locations where there is not the same level of bike share stations and really get them there. And so I think you're starting to see that continue to grow. And again, the ridership kind of tells us that's what's happening. We're getting more and more people on bikes moving around as you noted, bike shares hitting record days, which is great.
And it seems like scooters, for a while were such a magnet for usage, but also criticism. And it seems like that's kind of peaked. Is the financial model on that not working as well, or did the scooters just do one of these? Like they were incredibly popular and then they kind of vanished?
I still have never ridden a scooter, so I don't know. But I guess if I think about why have I not gotten on a scooter, I just feel much more comfortable. I feel more confident. I feel safer on a bike than I do on a scooter, especially when I'm mixing into a bike lane or into travel lanes. So I certainly still get a fair share of complaints from people about, somebody who rides a scooter on a sidewalk or recklessly kind of like jumps in and startles or even gets close to hitting a pedestrian. So I think the complaints are still there, but I don't see scooter sharing growing as much as I do our bike sharing.
Yeah. My overarching theory of neighborhood politics is the 10% theory, that it's the bad 10% of whatever group that wrecks it for everyone else. It's the bad 10% of liquor license holders that give all the liquor license holders a bad name. It's the 10% of citizens that are making the good businesses crazy, that ruin the opinion of citizens. And I feel like the scooters, and it's true of pedestrians, it's true of bicyclists, it's true of drivers.
Yeah, exactly. We have bad scooter drivers, we have bad car drivers, we have bad cyclists. Like there's a group of people who are operating every mode you can think of in unsafe ways, and that's something we've got to tackle across the board. So for I think the way we have to think about it too, though, is what is your degree of potential harm that is caused by that bad behavior? So a scooter driver who crashes into an elderly pedestrian is going to hurt that pedestrian pretty seriously. So you got to think about that harm, right? But the person driving the 2 tons of steel that is being a bad driver and crashes into a pedestrian is going to do even more damage. And so when we think about our policies, our laws, all our efforts, you got to put who's the most vulnerable user up front, and then try to craft ideas and solutions around that harm that can be done. And clearly some things have disproportionate harm, which is why we put such a focus on dangerous drivers, because we are seeing, unfortunately, fatalities on our roadways go up, injuries on our roadways go up, near misses on our roadways go up. And I think as we think about the future of mobility, the future of transportation, we've also got to really focus in on how are we making sure it's safe to get from point A to point B, no matter which way you go. I don't care if you're driving a car, riding a bus, walking, biking, scootering, you have a right to get from point A to point B safely. And that consumes a lot of my time these days, thinking about how we can do better, because I'm unsatisfied with where we are right now.
Yeah, and I feel like post-COVID mental health has a lot to do with it. It seems like everyone is just so pissed off all the time, and that shows up in behavior in transportation. It shows up in how people are driving. Taking a cab the other day, and 3 people almost hit the cab. In a short ride on a weekend afternoon. A lot of horn honk. I mean, it's anecdotal, but I feel like maybe people got out of practice during COVID, but people are just worse at the transportation means they used than they were a couple of years ago.
I think you could apply that to everything, though. I think that we see, I think you're right that the pandemic, and I've heard a lot of folks talk about this, that coming out of the pandemic, people lost a lot of societal norms, a lot of norm setting, of shared expectations, and those all have to be reset, and a lot of work has to be done. I think we see it play out. You can just throw a dart at a map and you're going to find examples of it. But I think transportation is certainly one of them. I think people that are behind the wheel of their car driving all of a sudden are much more impatient, much more selfish than they were before. And that is one of the things that has to change. And frankly, I think we, again, not getting too wonky here, I think from a policy perspective, that we have a lot of work to do to change the ways in which we're focused on safe roads and safe drivers. I think we've got dangerous drivers out there that aren't held accountable. I don't think we have a system that actually holds them accountable. We have a system that's built on the fact that driving is a right, not a privilege. We have an entire system that allows you to buy your way out of consequences. So you get a speeding ticket every day. As long as you pay that fine, nothing happens. Like I don't care whether you pay the fine or you don't pay the fine. If you have that many citations over and over and over again, you're a dangerous driver, whether you pay the fine or not. And so there's got to be consequences to that. We have this kind of perverse system that just allows people to kind of buy their way out of consequences. And that's not equitable, and it's not the right way to move forward. So we're going to change it. So we've got legislation and laws that we're working on to completely change how that works. And I think it'll lead to safer roads.
And how do we get, I feel like the council takes Vision Zero incredibly seriously and always has. But how do we get the rest of the government to do a better job with a life and death issue? It's not just a slogan. It's not just a press conference. It's literally life and death.
I mean, you're touching on something that's been a frustration of the council, I think, for a number of years. We've passed between my Vision Zero Amendment Act, some of my colleagues around safe schools, safe streets, like we've passed at least 3 or 4 really big transportation related bills that focus on safer streets, slower speeds. And we have not seen the executive branch move those forward. We've not seen them fund them and really expedite them. You even saw the Washington Post this weekend, talking about how DDOT is not moving forward on safer streets, slower streets, safer intersections, and really kind of taking them to task for that as well. So I think that we're all frustrated with it. We also just went through a budget process where essentially all of our Vision Zero efforts, there was an attempt to repeal much of it. And the council had to go back, say with one voice yet again, this is a priority, we're going to do this. And through the Transportation Committee, we were able to fund many of these efforts, which is important. So we're going to keep pushing and pushing hard. And I'm hopeful that we will see a equal amount of partnership with the agencies and the executive branch, that this is a priority. But if we don't, we will just continue to pass the laws, to fund the budget, and use oversight to keep banging away at it.
And I mean, people are always hounding the council for why aren't you doing oversight? Why aren't you getting the executive to do more? And it's like pushing a wet noodle. I mean, we don't have that much power. And when we try to exercise power where we can, saying we're not going to fund this thing you want, we're not going to let this thing you want proceed until you do this thing we're insisting on, then it's like council to, council the compute, and it's off topic of transportation, but the article in the Post this weekend about how we're not going to give kids new laptops because we're pushing to get schools equal funding year to year. That's not at all what's happening. But when we try to kind of put the screws to the executive a bit and force them to do what the law requires them to, there's always dodging and weaving, and we try to put enforcement mechanisms in, and then we get thrown under the bus. I don't think people realize how hard it is for a legislature to try to force action. You can write a bill, you can fund a bill. It's just so complicated. It seems like how we spent half our time.
Well, obviously, a lot of people don't, the council is the legislative branch, not the executive. But I'll give you an example of, frankly, kind of the doggedness that it takes to get something done. So I was, my team and I go out door knocking, talking to constituents from time to time to, just kind of find out what are the issues going on, how can we help? So early June, we're knocking on doors in Southwest, and some neighbors say, hey, while you're here, by the way, DDOT repaved our road, but they forgot to put back the speed humps. They forgot to put back the crosswalk. So now they just turned our street into a drag strip, like people are racing down us. So go take a look. The signs are still up on the side of the road that says speed hump, but there's no speed hump. The signs are still up that says pedestrian crosswalk, but there's no crosswalk. So I start reaching out to the DDOT director, start reaching out to their agency. It took over a month, about a month and a half. They finally got a team out there. They replaced the speed humps and got them put in. They put back in the crosswalk. But that wasn't enough to me just to do that. Something failed that they had repaved and didn't even put back the safety measures back. One of the laws that we passed requires DDOT to issue a fine, a monetary fine to their contractor when they screw up like this. So I stayed on them, finally got DDOT to issue a $71,000 fine to Fort Meyer Construction, who had forgotten to put the speed humps and forgotten to put the crosswalk back for 36 days. So for more than a month, they had just not done their job. And it took a lot of emails and a pretty dogged response to go after this one block. Well, guess what? There's blocks like that all over the city. And an individual council member can't go do that all over the place. So we will exercise our oversight that way. $71,000 for one block that they messed up. You won't see a change until it hits their pocketbook. Like, these companies have got to feel that if they don't do their job, which is to pave the street, yes, but return it to its safe condition, there's a monetary fine that actually means something to them. And so I will continue to focus on that, but I also am pushing now DDOT to say, why was it that your contractor and your team messed this up? How did you not see what I saw? How did you not see what my neighbors saw? And it's replicated over and over again, and that's going to drive change, or else we have to drive a change in leadership. Like, that's what has to happen.
Right, and something tells me that if Fort Myer didn't pull their barrels out of the parking spaces, so people couldn't park on the street once the paving was done, it wouldn't have taken 46 days to fix that. You know,
it's structural, right? I'm dealing with constituents actually today. There was a car that was abandoned at an intersection, and whoever this person was left the car blocking bike lanes last Wednesday. Today is Monday. They sent me, neighbors reached out to me last night complaining about it. They sent me pictures, and there's tickets on the windshield of this car that's sitting in the middle on the side of the intersection blocking the painted bike lanes. It's been since Wednesday. There's tickets. Clearly DPW and the inspectors came out and saw it and issued a citation. Is there any scenario you think that if a vehicle was left in the middle of a car travel lane for 5 days, that it wouldn't be removed? No, but we treat the bike lane very differently. And so I reached out to DPW this morning, and the leadership is going to jump on it. They're going to go get that car removed today. And I appreciate that. But again, we cannot have a system that is dependent on the council member reaching out to the right agency director, who then will take the right action, and I appreciate it. Something happened that you got that situation where inspectors just kept writing tickets rather than remove the car. Because just like your example, the cones left in the middle of the street would have been removed within 30 minutes. A car that had just been abandoned in the middle of a travel lane, that would have been removed and towed. But the city treats it differently. And so that, I think, is one of our biggest barriers to creating the type of mobility you talked about at the top of the show, is being able to have a level set of enforcement, of rules that make sure that if I need to get around by bike, if that's my choice for that day, to run those errands and do the things I got to do, that I have confidence I've got a safe way to get there from point A to B. And we're not there yet. And it's going to take a lot of pushing.
Now let's pivot back. We've spent a lot of time on smaller individual point-to-point. Let's talk about Metrobus and Metro Rail, since they are the big 800-pound elephants in the room. First of all, where are we on free bus?
Well, at the moment, WMATA and the WMATA board is not ready to move forward with that. So even though the district found the funding, offered to write a check to WMATA, who seems to say they have a shortfall, they said no, they don't want the money right now. So that, unfortunately, is on pause. We've passed the legislation, but what we really have to do right now is focus on the future of Metro overall. They are facing a fiscal cliff as the federal rescue dollars from the pandemic are winding down. They have some structural financial major problems that aren't just about ridership. If ridership tomorrow was back at pre-pandemic levels, they still would face a large financial gap. So Metro is facing a pretty significant financial challenge. And we've got to, we need to say that failure is not an option, that we will figure this out, because we literally can't have the region succeed without it. But there's a lot of work that's going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months to find solutions on that, so that our Metro Rail and our Metro Bus continue to run. Metro Bus ridership is basically back to pre-pandemic levels. It's largely recovered. And that's because the bus, one, moves essential workers, but two, our Metro Bus serves our city in a way that connects people to jobs, to neighborhoods, to the errands they've got to run. So Metro Bus is crucially important, but it's also largely recovered. Metro Rail during the weekday, because a lot of white collar workers have not returned to the office, and that's now holding fairly constant, that ridership is not coming back. at the same level. And it doesn't appear to be coming back anytime soon, with federal workforce not changing their patterns either. But again, even if I changed and got ridership back to pre-pandemic levels, they still are facing a very significant financial gap. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us to help rescue WMATA and get them on the solid footing they've got to be. And that's going to hit everybody, whether you're a bus rider or a rail rider. It is a clear and urgent matter pressing the district and the region. Virginia and Maryland have got to step up.
And how much of the fix for that, how much of that is federal and how much of that is jurisdictions?
It's all jurisdictional right now because the federal government doesn't chip in on some of these elements. We want them to, but this is largely going to fall in jurisdictions, the district, Richmond in Virginia, and Annapolis for Maryland. So it is an issue that we have got to solve, and it's one that I'm going to be spending a lot of my time on, I think, for the next 6 to 12 months.
And this is a situation where, I don't want to say Metro is designed to fail, but the Metro didn't do anything wrong. There's just a hole in their budget that it was not designed the way other transit districts were designed to be funded. Can you go a little, you know this better than I do, but that's my understanding of it, that it's not mismanagement that got us here. But we need to fix it. And hopefully when we fix it, it'll be fixed. We'll have a sustainable ongoing model, but we're not there.
There's clearly management that helps run an efficient system. And so we want, like, if you're going to come write the district, ask the district to write a big check. If you're going to come ask us to write a big check, I need to be assured that management has taken every step possible to control their costs and lower the ask, right? So there is management. But to your point, there is the district, and not the district, WMATA has a structural financial problem that has never been solved from when WMATA first opened their doors. And there's no dedicated revenue that funds our system the way that other cities, other jurisdictions do. So we are constantly dependent on going to 3 different state jurisdictions and the federal government to ask for this combination of funding sources. And that means that they don't have the type of reliability and predictability in financing that other jurisdictions do have. And that is certainly one of the moments that we need to try to meet, is not just how do we fill the hole, how do we make sure WMATA can keep going, but how are we trying to structurally fix this thing so that 5 years from now, we're not back having the exact same conversation about a massive funding gap that's got to be filled.
What are the menu options to fix this? Because I remember at some point there was a talk about a regional sales tax. Sales taxes are inherently regressive. Getting it through 3 legislatures is obviously complicated, but what are the menu of options that are available?
I think getting a regional revenue source is going to be very, very difficult. But let's use the example of a regional sales tax that would then be dedicated to WMATA. On one hand, that sounds like a very roughly predictable amount of revenue generation that's hitting from all 3 jurisdictions to focus into WMATA. So I think that's why it's attractive to some people. On the flip side, sales taxes are generally thought of as kind of a regressive tax because those that have the most ability to pay are just paying the same rate as the people who have the least ability to pay. And then there's how do you get something like that through 3 different state jurisdictions where Richmond for Virginia would have to agree, Annapolis in Maryland, and the District of Columbia. That's a tall order to get all 3 legislative bodies and executive branches to agree on one shared strategy. So I think that's going to be a very difficult one to get done, but it's certainly one that's been talked about. You know, there's everything from, do you target property taxes around metro stations, where the fact that you have metro creates an increased value in land, in your buildings. And so if we're going to be investing in making that property close to a metro more valuable, then should we also be expecting a greater amount of real estate property taxes? Again, in theory, that possibly could be an idea. It's on the table. On the flip side, let's think about downtown recovery. Is this the time that we want to be increasing property taxes on businesses downtown that are on top of metro, even with their buildings being more valuable? I have to weigh that as a possible consideration as well, that maybe that's not the right timing as we're thinking about our economic recovery. So there's a lot of different moving pieces. So at this point, everything's on the table to try to think through what a solution could look like. My hunch will be each jurisdiction is going to probably identify what their part of the puzzle is that they have to solve for. And then they've got to figure out their solution on their own for this first year. And then the regional type of revenue is kind of the next battle to take place.
And what's our deadline?
Yesterday is our deadline. I don't think people understand how pressing this is right now. WMATA works on a fiscal year of July 1. So we are 11 months away from WMATA having to massively cut services in a way that we all know is not going to happen because it would be unsustainable. We don't have an option. We have to solve this. It will have to have a solution next February and March as each of the legislative branches go into session. So Maryland has a much more condensed legislative cycle than the district does. They only meet for about 90 days per year. Virginia has a condensed legislative cycle. So the district we can solve problems year round. Annapolis and Richmond can only solve problems during a very short window. That's basically February, March, and April. So the three of us have to get on the same page about a solution so that it fits each one of our jurisdictions.
Yeah, and so that it can make it through the set beat. We have to be to that point before their sessions or early in their sessions.
I think we will have to have solutions. I mean, we all know that nothing focuses people's attention like a deadline. So I do think that there will be lots of moving pieces all the way until the very last minute, but we do need to have some pretty significant clarity about where we're going before they start their legislative sessions. And because they've got to pass the legislation, they got to pass the budgets to make it all happen. And we do too. This isn't going to be an easy lift for the district. Let me just put it in context. We believe that the district's portion of this is somewhere around $300 to $400 million. DC's local revenue last year, in terms of how much we spent, was about $10 billion. If I needed to make cuts to fund this, you're talking of the order of magnitude that I would have to make cuts across the entire district government of 4 to 5%. Every program you can think of, imagine a 4 to 5% cut. That is something we just simply cannot do, and we won't do. We're going to have to figure out how to raise revenue to meet this goal. That is a politically hard thing to do, and it'll be something that we have to have a coordinated and shared strategy between the executive branch, the legislative branch, as well as regionally to come up with a solution. So it's a tall task, but it's one that we have no option. We have to meet this challenge, and I'm confident we will. And as the chair of transportation, it's something I'm putting a lot of my energy into. As the chair of the COG board, our Council of Governments regionally next year, it'll be something I've got to put a lot of my energy into as well. So it is something I think, again, it'll be on a dominant theme for me for the next 6 to 12 months.
And potentially hitting at the same time, hopefully this won't go through, but if the congressional rider on banning new traffic camera revenue, because what is that on top of a $300 to $400 million hole in the budget that we'd have? There would be that, which is also a 3-figure number of millions, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about $980 million over the next 4 years. It's not a serious proposal. It's not coming from serious people. This is Scott Perry, who's
that doesn't stop them from making it happen, though.
It doesn't, but we know that there are serious people in the White House. There's serious people in the Senate, and there are serious people in the House. Imagine how do you get a Pentagon workforce to their jobs if there is no metro? How do you get people to the inauguration if there is no metro? How do you get people to, when your constituents come to visit DC, how do you move them around if there is no metro? I don't believe that Congress understands much. They definitely don't understand the economics of a transit system and what it means to the entire region, nor to the ability for their own functions, their own workforce. So it's an incredibly short-sighted proposal that Scott Perry and a couple of the Republicans are putting forward. It's not serious, but the risk is very serious if they were to actually be able to move this forward. So we're pushing on all levers to push back on that and make sure that that does not come to pass. But yeah, if they were to actually be able to do that, it would have just absolutely devastating, detrimental impacts, not just on the district economy, which they love to just treat as a punching bag. Literally the federal workforce, the military, everybody would have a very difficult time getting to work, and it would have a massive impact that they don't really fully appreciate.
We won't even get into the fact that they're trying to legislate right turn on red. We don't have a long enough show to go into how absurd that is.
Yeah, talk about, a not serious body.
But we are running out of time, but we're, as always, going to pivot to the fun closeout round. We did a little bit of this last time. So you're an old pro. This is and I'm going to lay the rules out more explicitly, because we had words last time, because you accused me of changing the rules partway through the game. So I will be very clear this time.
Yes,
this
sir.
is which council member, this is where I'll be clear, past or present, which colleague, past or present, would you pick to tackle these tasks and why? The first task is for a camping trip. Which council member would you pick to go on a camping trip with you?
David Catania, because it would be absolutely hilarious the entire time.
I would watch that TV show.
And I think he would actually come up with some really great things to cook on a campfire or to drink afterwards. So I'd pick David Catania.
Yeah. You see, the last time I didn't mention you could pick past council members. I feel like
I'm reaching in. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Next one, a tough phone customer support issue where you're not getting your point made, you're not getting through, you need action, you need progress. Which council member, past or present, are you gonna pick and why?
Then who do I want handling the phone call?
Who do you want on your side advocating for you? They take the phone, they're like, Charles, I'll handle this. And they get on the phone with Comcast or whoever, and like they're gonna win your case for you.
Vincent Orange, because he's gonna tell everyone that he is the best and he is gonna get it done.
Okay, no further comment on that. How about whose Rolodex would you like to borrow?
Phil Mendelssohn, because he actually probably has a Rolodex.
He actually probably has a Rolodex.
No one else even has one. I think it would be Phil.
That there's a little bit of an Easter egg built into that question, because will people know what a Rolodex is when I ask?
He's going to have it right next to his 3 typewriters. It's going to be right there.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Absolutely true. How about mediating a dispute? If you had 2 groups of neighbors, you just couldn't, and for some reason you would always bring peace to them. But if you were busy that day, what council member would you pull into that?
Next to me, I think I'd throw Matt Fruman at that. Matt's a really good listener. And I think he does a great job of making sure people feel heard. So I'll throw Matt Fruman into that one.
Excellent. And the last question is, whose poetry would you like to read? This is under an assumption that all council members write poetry. Whose poetry, council member, past or present, would you like to read?
I will go with Janice Lewis George.
And why?
I think she's an excellent communicator. And so I think she does a wonderful job of explaining and sharing her position, why she takes a position, what she's thinking, what she's feeling, what she's believing. So I would love to read her poetry.
And you think that would translate to poetry, that skill set?
I think she's a great communicator, so I'd love to, yeah.
Okay, and whose poetry would you most actively avoid? Couldn't get away from it quickly enough.
Gosh, I don't know. I feel like you're putting me in a position where I automatically need to pick a past council member. I'll go with Jack Evans. I don't know if I want to read his poetry.
I think that's very well answered and very apt. Well, again, thank you but his Instagram, that's a whole different story. So anyway, we're over time. That the fun round is too much fun. So I tend to let it go on long. But thank you again for being generous with your time, for coming back. Listeners, remember to subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search under Hearing the Council. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio at 96.3 on your FM HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. This is not a council hearing. This is hearing the council. Thank you, council member. Thank you, listeners. See you
Thanks,
next time.
Josh.
Appreciate it. Have a good day.